Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on Boxing. So I'm laying here today, Sunday, chilling after a early morning watching boxing from the UK. And there's a few repercussions from this weekend's boxing. So let's talk about those repercussions and the possibilities because of them. So I'll start with the three fights that obviously have repercussions moving forward and break them down, check them out, talk about them, and feel free to leave comments in the comments section giving your opinions and breakdowns on these three topics of discussion. First, number one, Haime Mongraal. Obviously, Haime Mongraal is coming off of his first career loss to Canelo Alvarez in what was a entertaining fight, fun, exactly what I expected out of the fight. Not disappointed at all. This is a solid opponent, an ex-world champion who's obviously one of the best guys currently at 168 pounds. He was in his bounce back fight this weekend versus Eric Bazinian, my Canadian brethren. I knew Bazinian's a solid fighter, has a fairly good resume, good boxer, had a bit of power as well. But this was obviously going to be a big step up for him. For Mongraal, the question was, how is he going to transition from his first career loss to Canelo? Is he going to improve from that? Or exactly how is he going to continue to move forward in his career? He's still a young guy with a long career ahead of him, obviously in one of the most exciting divisions in boxing. The one thing to pay attention to was the fact that he moved back to his trainer, Morales, leaving Freddie Roach. And obviously people thought Freddie Roach was, perfecting his style a bit, and he looked really good under Freddie Roach. And people were wondering if it was going to be a step backwards, moving back with Morales. For me, I understand that obviously being with legendary boxer Morales as a Mexican, there's going to be a real connection right there for him, as opposed to being with, American old Freddie Roach, who, on a personal level, you probably can't really relate to that much, even though maybe the sparring you're getting in his gym and the experience is beneficial. Nonetheless, we saw him go out there. Bazinian was able to out-jab him the majority of the fight, showed that he was probably the better boxer overall, but Mongraal continued to push forward, continued to hit that body, continued to break Bazinian down, ended up stopping him in the 10th round, which turned out to be a really, really good result. And now the question is, what's he going to do moving forward? Obviously, there's a lot of really good fights at this division for Mongraal. Now that he just fought Canelo Alvarez, obviously he got a lot of attention from that fight, and with the Mexican fan base behind him, potentially he may be able to go on to be a real player in American boxing. The question is, how's he going to follow up this performance against somebody that potentially could sell more, maybe even potentially do a pay-per-view of his own? What people were expecting was possibly him working in this fight with top-ranked Bob Arum, meaning that the next possible fight to look forward to him being involved in was a Christian Mbili fight, since Mbili is a top-ranked fighter. And for me, Mongraal Mbili, fucking Christ, that shit would be dynamite. As a boxing fan, if you wouldn't be excited by that all-out scrap style of boxing, I don't know what to say about you as a boxing fan. That shit is kind of like Arturo Gatti, Ward type of situation. Morales Marquez. It's just a really, really exciting potential matchup between two aggressive fighters. Mbili might not have the biggest name, but anyone that really follows boxing knows that stylistically he is a beast. But yet, he's got enough holes in his game where a possible fight with him and Mongraal would be dynamite. I would favor Mongraal because he's the longer fighter, able to use his jab a bit more, has better feet movement, foot movement, and has been in with higher level of opposition. But we know that, he also, what's great about him, similar to a guy like Gatti, is that regardless of who he fights, fights always turn out to be very exciting, which is a negative when you're facing an aggressive, hard punching fighter like Mimbili. You don't want to give him too many chances to capitalize on your vulnerability. But nonetheless, a potentially great fight, him working with Top Rank. Apparently, he's still with Golden Boy, but that's what the question was regarding his current situation with Top Rank in this last fight. Another fight that obviously everybody was talking about after this fight was a potential matchup between him and Edgar Berlanga, right? Even on my post-fight video that I was doing, we were all talking about that fight as well, because you're still pushing that Puerto Rican-Mexican storyline, which obviously is going to get people to support the fight. It's also going to be seen as much more of a 50-50 fight as opposed to Berlanga versus Canelo Alvarez. Berlanga won a lot of fans with his toughness and determination against Canelo Alvarez. You're both coming in after losing, competitive fights with Canelo. Obviously, he won both fights convincingly, dropping both of these guys during the fight, but both guys were able to go the distance, showed a lot of heart, and you would think that they're both going to improve thanks to being in the ring with Canelo. So now is the time to potentially do a fight between the two of them, which easily could be put on pay-per-view, and stylistically is also a great fucking fight. A great fight, right? And the difference between this and Mbili, obviously Berlanga has more of an ingrained fan base compared to Mbili, who, being a French fighter, fighting out of Canada, you're kind of limiting the amount of fan base that potentially you could have to support you. Whereas Puerto Rico, they're going to be even more behind Berlanga moving forward, especially against a guy like Munguia, who I'm sure people see as potentially being beatable. So that's a fight that I think everybody would be down with as well. But then you have some other fights, and maybe promotional politics might get in the way of some of these potential fights, but nonetheless, they should be mentioned and addressed. Obviously, Caleb Plant is coming off of a solid performance. He did look vulnerable in this fight, but he also showed his toughness and his heart in getting the stoppage victory. And now a potential fight between Caleb Plant and Munguia, that would be a serious fight. We know that Caleb Plant was already a world champion at this weight. His only two losses both coming to elite level fighters in Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez, a common opponent in Canelo. So a potential fight between these two guys would be very, very intriguing. Obviously, to work with Plant, you'd have to work with Al Haymon in the PBC, but we keep this optimistic and open, just assuming that everybody wants to make great fights. So we'll bring this up as a great possible matchup as well. The only thing that might potentially get in the way of a fight like this is the fact that we have been hearing rumors, rumblings that Plant and Charlo might be the fight to get done. And if that was the case, that's great. Nobody would be angry about Plant versus Charlo being made. Obviously, they have a storyline behind them. That fight would be really, really intriguing to the American market. So, it just shows you a lot of the great possibilities currently at 168 pounds when we're not only talking about Canelo Alvarez. There's a lot of other shit to talk about. And then you throw in a guy like Diego Pacheco. Diego Pacheco is a Mexican-American fighter. Obviously a very good fighter coming off of a solid performance. A guy that's right there at that level of the Munguia, Berlanga, Plant, and Mbili. You throw him in a fight with Munguia, and now you have Mexican versus Mexican, but you have that die-hard Mexican and that Mexican-American. So I think that also sells as well, especially to the American market. Obviously, Pacheco can relate to English-speaking market more so than Munguia, who doesn't speak English. So I think any of these scenarios would be fucking unbelievable. As a boxing fan, I'll be super stoked if any of those fights got made, and so it'll be interesting to see what direction Munguia does go after this performance this weekend, and just cross your fingers hoping for the best. Scenario number 2, and that would be Hamza Sharz. Hamza Sharz just had an impressive performance today, stopping his opponent on the Anthony Joshua Daniel Dubois undercard, looking very impressive in the process. And something that definitely jumped out to boxing fans that keep their eyes open was the fact that post-fight, there was a picture taken between Hamza Sharz and Janibek. And obviously, Janibek said, shout out to my brother. Obviously, they're both Muslims, so they have that Muslim brotherhood connection. But what's more interesting is the fact that they're there at this Saudi Arabian card in London. Obviously, Hamza Sharz has been on several of these cards, and currently the problem with Janibek, the unified middleweight champion, is that he hasn't been able to really get any big fights. He hasn't been able to get the big promotional support behind him to make fights. Obviously, being part of Top Rank, he's kind of gotten fights to defend his titles that have been marginal and not really the most exciting of potential opponents. Nothing that was able to really big him up or build his name, brand, which has kind of left him, on the outside looking in. Obviously, you have Charlo and Carlos Adames, two world champions in that division, but both of them are PBC fighters. So we would assume that it's much more likely that those two fighters potentially may be matching up against one another for a unification fight, an inside PBC fight, which is pretty consistent with how the PBC runs their business. So this would still leave Janibek on the outside looking in. Hamza Sharz has really gotten a lot of support behind him, really started to build up his fan base, and is getting talked about a lot now. But where is he going to win a title? How's he going to go to that next level? Well, to do that, he's going to have to fight a world champion. And that champion, of course, would be Janibek, and they just took that picture together. So obviously they have a good relationship. And obviously we know Hamza Sharz has a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Turki Al-Sheikh, who's been putting him on his cards. So this is just a no-brainer. It's kind of a similar situation to Better Be Evan Bivol. A great fight, but unfortunately other promotional companies weren't willing to foot the bill for that fight, so it was sitting around not really getting done until, of course, Saudi Arabia jumped in and put the money on the table. And for Janibek, this is a similar situation. He's been looking for a big opponent, a big fight, and now here he is. And we know that obviously they really gear towards the UK market, so you got the UK market, Hamza Sharz right there, trying to become a star, trying to become a unified middleweight champion by beating Janibek Elimekune. Who knows if he can do it or not, but the reality is this is a great fight for both guys. It makes a lot of sense. We know that Janibek currently has a fight with the New Zealand Ukrainian fighter that he was supposed to fight previously, not a fight that's getting much attention. But you need to do what you got to do, right, as a mandatory. So him potentially jumping in to work with Saudi Arabia to fight Hamza Sharz would be fucking excellent. He'd shine a lot of positive light on the middleweight division. It would obviously give the unified champion his biggest opportunity of his career. And there's a bit of conspiracy right now going on as well. It's being reported from quite a few people within the business that apparently Janibek turned down a contract to fight Hamza Sharz. Yet him and his promoter or manager both came out and denied that and said that it's pure fucking speculation and bullshit. There's no truth to it at all. And I'm not going to get into negotiations between people because, that's not my job. I'm a boxing fan. I don't know the 411 in these scenarios, but you can understand when things get done, it's always business first. So I would think if there is speculation about this, obviously whoever was talking about it never made a real offer, and that's why it's never really been discussed. Now that they got Saudi Arabia behind it, you would assume that the money is there. So if they make an offer to him, there would be very little reason for him to walk away from what would inevitably be the biggest fight of his career, and financially, obviously, the best fight of his career. So I got my fingers crossed that, hopefully early 2025, will be able to get Janibek back in the ring defending his unified titles against number one WBO ranked opponent Hamza Sharz, which should be a great fight. I really like Sharz. I think he's a really, really fun fighter to watch. A boxer, puncher, a lot of power. Obviously, Janibek is much more of a skilled boxer, defense first type of guy. But nonetheless, it's still a very good matchup, and I can't wait to see how things unfold regarding that. Then we get to part 3. We might as well end with the big one. Now we get to Daniel Dubois. So Daniel Dubois just became a star, fighting in front of 100,000 people in London on a Saudi Arabian card against Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua trying to make history to become one of these few heavyweights that have become 3-time heavyweight champions. Unfortunately, he was not able to do it. Daniel Dubois came out and was a wrecking machine, as he's been in his last few fights. He's looked excellent in his last few fights. Even when you go so far as back to his last loss to Usyk. Early on in that fight against Usyk, he was having a lot of success until the controversial low blow punch, and then obviously him looking like he quit afterwards. But since then, he's been dynamite. And you know, the reality is sometimes losing is winning. You fight great competition, you get beat, and as a process, you end up learning about yourself, learning about the fight game, learning about really the quality of opposition and how you need to up your game to compete. And obviously today he came out and was destructive against Anthony Joshua, who looked totally fucked in that fight. Never did he look settled at all at any time in that fight. You know, always looked kind of like he did in the second Andy Ruiz fight. Really mentally kind of checked out. And I don't know what was going in sparring or whatnot. I know that leading into the Andy Ruiz first fight, there was speculation that he'd been knocked out in sparring leading into that fight, and that's why he was mentally sort of broken on fight night. With this one, of course, we haven't heard any kind of rumors like that, so you know, it's hard to know what to expect. We thought that his relationship with his new trainer was really improving him overall, but we didn't see any of that today. Today, he really looked disappointing. I mean, even Alexander Usyk said that he was really disappointed in the performance. This was a fight he felt AJ should win, but yet he did not look like the AJ they knew at all. And I don't want to take away from Dubois, because Dubois, I said leading into this fight, was a 50-50 fight, and don't be surprised if Daniel Dubois knocks Anthony Joshua out. And that's exactly what happened. And anyone that watches my channel knows that I'm a big AJ fan, so I'm not hating on AJ. If anything, obviously I said that I'm supporting him and I hope he wins, but don't be surprised if he gets knocked out. And so, needless to say, I was not surprised when he got knocked out today. I was disappointed, but not surprised. For Daniel Dubois, now where does this lead him? We know there's a potential rematch between him and Anthony Joshua. I don't think anyone is really going to be too interested in watching that, because I think a rematch between AJ and Dubois ends even quicker, to be honest. You know, stylistically, it's just a bad matchup for AJ. And I don't know if that's the direction he really should go, especially at this point in his career. For Dubois, he could sit around and wait for the possible winner of Fury and Usyk, which would be huge, but depending on how that unfolds, he still may not have a potential fight. If Fury wins, they might possibly do a trilogy, which financially would make tons of sense, especially if it's a competitive fight. You know, 1-1, you go into the third fight, that would leave Daniel Dubois sort of on the outside looking in. So he could potentially do an AJ fight, but it's not necessarily a fight, as I said, that I think people would be asking for. If Fury loses, then most of us feel that probably a Fury AJ fight will happen, because it's a bigger fight. Financially, it's more intriguing. Both guys coming off of losses, so it's pretty interesting, even though it's not for a world title. which would mean that Daniel Dubois may then possibly try to get revenge against Alexander Usyk. But for Usyk, if he beats Fury at this point in his career, is fighting Daniel Dubois even something that he's interested in, right? Because he's already beat him once. He beat AJ twice. He beat Fury in this scenario 2 times. So, what else is there left for him to do? Does he really need to fight Daniel Dubois? Not really. So I don't know if that would be high on his list of possible fights that he would be chasing. But then we look at some other big possible fights that could easily be made that make a lot of sense. One fight that I talked about earlier today, and I think it resonates today as well, or just resonates in the future, is a potential Joseph Parker fight. Joseph Parker's coming off of great performances, has reinvented himself as well, just like Daniel Dubois has. And you throw those 2 fighters in against each other. Obviously, both of them very well known in the UK. Daniel Dubois, UK boxer. Parker has fought primarily in the UK. So even though he's not from the UK, he's a very well-known fighter, and would be a great opponent for Dubois. And stylistically, it would be a really intriguing fight. Parker is not the most exciting fighter. He's very technically good. He's skilled, but Dubois is going to push the fight and make him fight, which is going to be pretty interesting, especially since they already have common opponents to look at stylistically how that would match up. So that's a fight I'd love to see, right? That fight I think would be dynamite, fantastic. You also have potential up-and-comer young man who wants to break Mike Tyson's heavyweight record in Moses Ituma, right? You throw Moses Ituma in with Daniel Dubois. If he's able to beat Dubois, he becomes the youngest heavyweight world champion in history. And whew, that's a big ask, man. Throwing young man Moses Ituma in with Daniel, right? Like it ain't an easy fight, but to do something that legendary, that great, you wouldn't expect it to be something easy, right? You expect it to be something hard earned and something that people would respect. I don't know if Dubois would specifically be interested in that fight, except that he is a warrior, and I think he could see a lot of himself in Moses Ituma, how he also, tried to win a title early in his career, chased after the biggest names very early, and as a process had a few losses early on in his career. So that's another possibility. You also have, of course, Jang and Bole, right? Obviously, Bole is coming off of a great performance, beating young upstart American and doing it impressively. So now you throw Bole in, who also has obviously a big fan base in the UK, since he's primarily been fighting out of the UK as well. You throw him in with Daniel Dubois, that shit would be dynamite. That stylistically is a great matchup between 2 big, aggressive, hard-punching fighters. That would be a really good fight. A fight that, as a boxing fan, I'd be super stoked for, right? And then, of course, you have Jang, who would be a great opponent as well. So, I think even if you don't get an AJ, a Fury, or an Usyk at this point, you still have some really, really, really great potential opponents in Parker, Moses Ituma, obviously Bole and Jang. Those would be all great fights. And potentially even a fight with a guy, say, like Andy Ruiz. The only problem with Andy Ruiz is he didn't get an impressive victory against Gerald Miller like he was supposed to. That was the setup for him to win that fight, and then he would have been right in the mix right now. But of course, he struggled and ended up with a draw against Miller. And obviously, we saw what Dubois did to Miller. So, it's not nearly as intriguing of a fight because of how disappointing Andy Ruiz actually was. But if Andy Ruiz bounces back, maybe beats Miller far more convincingly in a rematch, then now he becomes a really live dog and potential opponent for Dubois for maybe later on in 2025 as well. So there's a lot of great potential fights for Dubois. I think right now is the time for him to start taking over the heavyweight division. Obviously, you have AJ, Wilder, Usyk, and Fury, who are all ending their careers. And then you have this new crop of fighters that are there, and the one who's the most established and currently looking the most destructive is definitely Daniel Dubois. And it's pretty impressive to have another UK fighter who's just on the precipice of taking over the division. And I could easily see him do that. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think of these three scenarios, and who would you prefer these fighters to be matched up with in their next matchups. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below, and I'll see you next time. Remember to like, subscribe, and share.